My name is Darcy, and I'm 31 years old. I was sitting on my kitchen floor eating Chinese takeout straight from the container. The movers had left 4 hours ago and I hadn't found my plates yet. When my mother called to ask why I hadn't told them sooner about the house, I thought that was the whole problem. It wasn't. The real problem arrived the next morning in a white U-Haul truck my brother drove into my driveway without asking, and it ended 6 weeks later at my grandfather's 72nd birthday dinner when a $95,000 bank document hit the table and my father turned a color I'd never seen on a human face before. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and if you've ever had to protect something you built entirely on your own from the people who were supposed to be proud of you. This one's for you. I'd been saving since I was 23. That's not a brag, it's just math. I worked as a clinical operations coordinator at a hospital network in Charlotte, which sounds more impressive than it is. Long hours, decent salary, a lot of vendor contracts and supply budget spreadsheets and meetings that could have been emails. I liked the work. I liked being the person who actually knew where the numbers were. For 7 years I lived in a one-bedroom apartment in a complex that smelled faintly of someone else's cooking and had walls thin enough that I knew my neighbor's TV schedule by heart. I drove the same car I bought used in 2018. I made lunch at home most days, skipped the streaming bundles and moved 15% of every paycheck into savings automatically before I had a chance to think about it differently. In March, I closed on a 2-bedroom townhouse in a quiet subdivision 12 minutes from work. It had a good layout, a small backyard, and kitchen counters that weren't held together by rental-grade caulk and wishful thinking. I paid the closing costs myself. My name was the only one on the deed. Every dollar of the down payment came from that savings account I'd been feeding for 7 years. I made one mistake. I was happy, and happy people do foolish things. I texted my mother a photo of the keys in my hand with the message, "Got the keys today." That was it. No address, no invitation, just the photo. Within 3 hours, she called to tell me my brother and his wife needed the second bedroom. My brother is 28. He has always been the center of our family in the way that some people just are, not because they earn it, but because everyone around them quietly agrees to arrange the world so it tilts toward them. My parents talked about him with their chests out. He was the charming one, the one with big ideas, the one who took risks that other people were too boring to take. I was the one who paid her own rent since college, handled her own car insurance, and never once asked them for a loan. I was the responsible one, which in my family translated directly into the one we don't have to worry about, the one we don't have to show up for. My mother said it the way you'd ask someone to grab an extra chair at Thanksgiving. My brother and his wife had hit a rough patch. They needed a place to stay for just a couple months. I had 2 bedrooms and I lived alone, which apparently meant I had a vacancy. I told her no. She told me I was being selfish. I said the house was mine, that I'd bought it with my own money, that I hadn't even unpacked my own furniture yet, and that I was not converting my guest room into a long-term residence for adults who hadn't bothered to ask me themselves. She cried. I let her cry. I told her I loved her and I hung up. I thought that was the end of it. The next morning I was measuring coffee grounds when I heard a diesel engine groaning down my street. I looked out the front window and watched a white U-Haul truck jerk to a stop at the curb in front of my house. My brother stepped out of the driver's side and stretched his arms over his head like he'd just finished a long road trip. His wife climbed out of the passenger seat and immediately started looking at my front door the way you look at a hotel room you've already paid for. My parents' car pulled up right behind them. All 4 of them walked toward my porch like they were expected. I set down the coffee scoop and went to the door. My mother spoke first. She said they'd talked it over and this was the right thing. My father said my brother needed support right now, that families stepped up for each other, that this was not a complicated situation. My sister-in-law was holding a cardboard box of kitchen stuff and looking at my front door like she was already calculating where to put her dishes. I told all 4 of them they were not coming inside. My father stepped forward. He said I was being cruel. He used the word cruel twice, which meant he'd practiced it. I told him this was my house, my mortgage, and my property, and that I needed them to load back up and leave right now. My mother started crying again. My brother looked at my father the way a player looks at a coach before arguing a penalty call. My father put his hand on my doorframe, not aggressive exactly, but deliberate, the kind of move that's meant to signal that the conversation isn't over yet. He told me that family doesn't just lock the door on each other. I said, "Watch me," and I closed it. The knocking started about 10 seconds later. I want to pause here because I know how this looks. It looks like a family argument that escalated, and maybe if someone had described this scene to me 5 years ago, I'd have thought the same thing. But context matters, and this context goes back a long way. When I was 25, I paid $400 out of pocket for a weekend continuing education course in Nashville. It was a stretch that year. I mentioned it once in passing. My father said I was lucky I made decent money. That same month, my parents quietly gave my brother $2,000 to get back on his feet. After a job didn't work out, nobody announced it. I found out by accident 6 months later. When I brought it up, my mother's the situations were different. When I asked how, she changed the subject. I paid for my own master's program fully online while working full-time. When I finished it, my father said, "See, you didn't even need us." He thought it was a compliment. That pattern is why I knew, standing on the other side of that locked door, that if I opened it even a few inches, I was never going to close it again. My father discovered I had a doorbell camera. I'd installed it the day before and actually leaned down to speak into it. He said he wasn't leaving. My sister-in-law started carrying boxes from the U-Haul onto my porch. Not stacking them on the street, not loading them back. Actually walking them up my front steps and setting them on my porch like she was beginning to move in. I called the police non-emergency line. The officer who responded was young, methodical, and entirely unmoved by the emotional temperature of the situation. He spoke to my father first, then came to my door and asked me to confirm I was the homeowner. I confirmed it. He explained to my family that they needed to remove themselves and their belongings from my property immediately. My mother told him this was a family matter. The officer said, "Ma'am, this is private property," and waited. My sister-in-law moved the boxes back while crying loudly enough for the neighbors to hear. My brother loaded the U-Haul with his eyes on the ground the entire time. My mother sat in the car with the passenger window up. My father walked past me on the way down the driveway and said quietly, "You'll regret this." I went inside and sat on the floor until my hands stopped shaking, then I made my coffee. By that evening, the family group chat had erupted. My aunt sent the first message. Then a cousin I hadn't spoken to since a Christmas gathering 4 years ago. Then an uncle in Phoenix with zero context and very strong opinions. My mother had clearly spent the afternoon on the phone, because everyone seemed to have received the same basic version of events, in which I had refused to shelter my brother and his pregnant wife during a crisis, and then called the police on my parents for trying to talk to me. His wife is not pregnant, I want to be clear about that. My sister-in-law posted a video that night. She was sitting on the edge of a hotel bed, no makeup, a cardboard box visible behind her. She said she didn't normally share personal things publicly, but that they were in a desperate situation. She talked about being blindsided. She said a close family member had turned them away and called the police when they showed up with nowhere else to go. She cried, and she was genuinely good at it. The video got shared by 3 relatives within the first hour, one of whom dropped a link into the family chat with the comment, "This is absolutely heartbreaking." I didn't respond to any of it. What I did instead was open my laptop. I want to be honest about why I started digging. It wasn't because I immediately suspected something calculated. It was because the logistics didn't add up. My brother had held an account manager job at a logistics company for 3 years. His wife did freelance marketing work. They'd been renting a house in a suburb about 20 minutes from my parents. Leases end, people move. But you don't rent a U-Haul, pack everything you own, and show up at your sister's house the morning after she closes on it, unless the situation is significantly more urgent than a rough patch. Mecklenburg County has a searchable civil court database. I had both of their full legal names from an emergency contact form they'd sent me 2 years earlier. It took me under 10 minutes to find the filing. An eviction, not an expired lease, an eviction. The case had been filed 8 weeks earlier by the property management company that owned their rental house. The stated grounds were failure to pay rent for 5 consecutive months. 5 months. I sat with that number. Then I opened my sister-in-law's Instagram and scrolled backward to the month of the first missed payment. Her grid was full of travel content. A weekend in New York, a long weekend at a lake house in Tennessee, a birthday dinner at a steakhouse where she'd hashtagged the restaurant, and the caption said something about treating yourself unapologetically. One photo showed a new handbag sitting on a restaurant table next to a glass of wine, with a caption about choosing abundance. The comments under that post included one from my mother. She'd written, "You deserve every good thing, honey." This was posted 4 days after the first rent payment came due and went unpaid. I switched to my brother's Facebook, which he updates less. There was a post from about 6 weeks ago after the eviction filing that I almost scrolled past. One of those vague new chapters ahead posts with no specifics. The comments were full of people saying, "So exciting, can't wait to hear more." One commenter asked about a food truck. I searched his profile for food truck. 3 months back, he'd shared an article about SBA loan programs for restaurant startups with the caption "Doing my research." 2 months back, there was a photo of a commercial truck with the comment "Stay tuned." Nothing after that. I went back to the public records portal. SBA loans above certain thresholds are documented through UCC filings, Uniform Commercial Code, which are public record in North Carolina. I searched his name. The filing was there. The lender was listed as a community bank. The collateral was a commercial food truck and associated equipment. The principal amount was $95,000. The filing was dated 5 months ago, the same month as the first missed rent payment. I kept reading. A guarantee addendum was attached to the UCC filing. The guarantors were listed by name. My brother was listed first. Below his name were my parents, both of them. They had co-signed a $95,000 SBA loan for a food truck that had apparently stopped operating before I ever heard a word about it. The math assembled itself without any effort on my part. If my brother and his wife moved into my house, if I covered their living expenses even informally, even just by providing a roof and utilities, they'd free up their monthly income. That money would go somewhere. And since my parents were co-signers on a defaulted loan, the most logical place for it to go was straight back to them to cover what they owed the bank. I was not being asked to help my brother find his footing. I was being positioned as an unknowing financial cushion for a loan that had nothing to do with me, that I'd never been told existed, that my parents had signed without a single conversation. I printed everything and put it in a manila folder. There was one more piece. My grandfather, my father's father, is 72. He's private, not especially warm in an outward way, but fair, and I'd always had a relationship with him that was quieter and more honest than anything I had with my parents. He controls a family trust that nobody discusses directly, but that everyone in the family thinks about. He called me 3 days after the U-Haul incident, which he almost never does. He's not a calling person. He said he'd heard there was some tension. He said he had his birthday dinner coming up Saturday, and he hoped I'd be there. I told him I'd be there. Then I asked him as carefully as I could whether my father had been talking to him about anything financial lately. A long pause. He said my father had come to see him recently about an investment opportunity, said it was time-sensitive, said he needed capital quickly and didn't want to go through a bank. I asked how much. $120,000, he said. He wanted a direct transfer. I kept my voice even. I asked him if he'd agreed to anything. He said he'd told my father he'd think about it. I asked him to keep thinking, and not to move any money until after Saturday. I told him I had information he'd want to see first. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "All right, Darcy, I'll wait." I wore my black blazer to the dinner, the one I save for quarterly reviews when I need to feel like I have solid ground under me. I'd made 3 copies of the documents, the eviction filing, the UCC loan record, and screenshots of the social media posts with visible dates, and organized them in a folder I carried in my bag. I wasn't going to slide papers across a table and let anyone snatch them away. The dinner was in a private room at a steakhouse my grandfather had always liked. About 20 family members were there when I arrived. My parents were already seated. My brother and sister-in-law were there too. My sister-in-law tracked my entrance the way someone tracks a person they're not sure about yet. I sat near my grandfather. We talked quietly while the table filled up around us. He drank his water and watched the room. After the cake, my father stood. He gave a birthday toast first. Generous, practiced, the version of my father that people outside our house mostly knew. He talked about family legacy, about what it meant to be the kind of people who showed up for each other. He thanked my grandfather for building something worth being part of. People lifted their glasses. It was a genuinely good speech, which is the specific thing that made it hard to sit through. Then he turned to me. He said he was glad I was there, that he hoped this dinner was a chance for things to come back together. He said he knew things had been difficult lately, but that he believed in my character, believed I understood what was at stake, believed I was the kind of person who did the right thing when it mattered. He sat down. The table looked at me. I gave it a moment, then I stood up. I said, I want to make sure everyone here has the same information before we talk about what doing the right thing actually means. I opened the folder and walked copies to specific people, my grandfather, my father's brother, my mother's sister, who had been loudest in the group chat. I let them start reading before I said anything else. My brother pushed back his chair. My father said my name like a warning. I said, my brother and his wife weren't between places, they were formally evicted. 5 consecutive months of unpaid rent. The case filing is public record in Mecklenburg County, you're holding a printed copy. My sister-in-law said that was out of context. I said, I also found the SBA loan, $95,000 secured against a food truck that's no longer operating. Both of my parents co-signed it. The UCC filing is on page 2. The room went quiet in the particular way that rooms go quiet when something real has happened. I said, I wasn't asked to open my home out of generosity. I was being set up to cover my brother's living costs, so his income could be redirected to a loan my parents guaranteed. I was going to be funding their debt without knowing it existed. My father's expression shifted through several versions of itself very quickly. He said I was twisting things. He said I didn't understand how these financial arrangements worked. He said the loan was a separate issue from the housing situation, which was actually 2 separate things being conflated. My grandfather set down his copy of the documents. He said, is this the investment opportunity you asked me to fund? Everything stopped. My father opened his mouth. My grandfather said, don't. That one word was the quietest thing in the room. My father closed his mouth. My mother had both hands flat on the tablecloth. My sister-in-law looked at the table. My grandfather looked around the room slowly, the way he does when he's decided something. He said he would not be transferring any funds, that he'd be meeting with his attorney the following week to review the trust structure, and that he trusted everyone understood why. He looked at my father once more, not angry exactly, just clear, and then turned back to his coffee. Nobody at that table said anything for a long time. I left before the dishes were fully cleared. My grandfather walked me to the door and hugged me, which he almost never does. He said my grandmother would have liked me. I cried in the car for a few minutes, and I'm including that detail because it's true, and this story was never about being unaffected by any of it. It was about being right anyway. The next couple of months settled things at the edges the way they always do after something like this. My brother and his wife found a small apartment on their own. Nothing like what they'd had, but theirs to manage. My parents, without the buffer of my grandfather's trust, and without my household covering my brother's expenses, had to work out the SBA default directly with the bank. I don't know the specifics, I didn't ask. Some of the relatives who'd piled into the group chat to call me heartless sent individual messages afterward. A few apologized, most just went quiet, which I accepted as close enough. I blocked my parents, my brother, and my sister-in-law across every platform, not out of anger, out of clarity. The people who tried to use me as a financial shield while hiding what they were doing from me had made a set of choices, and those choices had consequences. Waiting for an explanation that made it all make sense was not something I was willing to do. My grandfather and I have dinner about once a month now. He asks about work, I ask about his garden. He told me once, a couple months after the birthday dinner, that he'd underestimated how clearly I'd been watching all those years. I told him most people do. The townhouse is quiet in the evenings. The kitchen is exactly the way I wanted it. There's a small concrete patio in the back where I drink my coffee on weekend mornings, and I sit there long enough to remember that what I have here, every square foot of it, I built myself, protected myself, and kept. Nobody handed it to me. Nobody ever was going to.